All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is Tim McDonald coming to you with another episode of Advocacy at Work. And today I am joined by one of my fellow colorectal cancer advocates, JJ Singleton. How you doing, JJ?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
No, so glad to have you here. And it's just so great that I think both of us started our advocacy journeys around the same time because I know we met in the Springfield Branson Airport as we were getting ready to head to fight CRC's ambassador training weekend about 4 years ago now. So it's great that we're both here still, and two, that we're both increasing our advocacy efforts in the colorectal cancer space. So but why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about you and what got you involved in advocacy, because I know you were diagnosed well before me, almost 4 years before me. I believe it was in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And so I know you just, like I just mentioned, we started about the same time, but I know you didn't do it for the first couple of years that you're in treatment. So just tell everybody a little bit about your journey and what got you into advocacy.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually diagnosed in September of 2015 at the age of 27. And then I went through the, chemo surgery. The cancer came back and spread throughout my abdominal wall and lymph nodes. And then at that time, I exhausted all of the approved treatments for that cancer. So clinical trial is what saved my life. But through that time, I was on TPN, pretty much living 23 hours in bed on infusions, not able to eat. And that was kind of my start where I knew I needed to do something. So I worked on myself with mental health and got me out of those, like the rock bottom stages. And then through that, healing is a process that brought me to advocacy. And then I kind of got pushed into it. I joined Man Up to Cancer, and I got bugged enough to apply to fight CRC because at that time I thought nobody wanted to hear what I had to say from a small town in the Appalachian Mountains. But I was like, I'm going to apply just so I could say I did it and then would be over with it. But I got accepted, and then that changed my life. And now when we met in that airport, I couldn't imagine the life I'm living right now and doing everything that I'm doing here. But that was kind of the start of it, and then it's just kind of blossomed into everything.
Yeah, well, we'll jump into a little bit more about all the details of that in a second here. But, it's just amazing. As you said that, I just wrote something about that myself, about not even imagining a year ago being where I'm at today, So I totally get what you're saying there about, not even comprehending where it was going to lead to. So before we jump in too far, though, how would you describe or define advocacy in your world?
Advocacy for me is just using my lived experience to help that next generation in any way possible. Like, it's not in a certain hole, it's not in a certain lane, because advocacy is different for every single person. That's what I've learned over the years. So mine is to be able to take all the things that made my life harder and rougher, that I can use that experience to help in whatever way the society or one person or a whole group of people need.
So I love the way you define that. So, like, just basically sharing our experiences. And what are some ways that you've actually done that? I mean, I know personally, like, from what I can see from my perspective, but why don't you share it from yours?
Yeah, well, starting off advocacy, I was like fully into just the colorectal cancer space, like trying to use, because that's so impactful to me. It changed my life having colon cancer at 27 and living with it for over 10 years now. So it was awareness, trying to go and affect policy with there. But through those connections and learning my voice and like just the differences of me living in the area I do and being as young as I am, it's allowed me to see advocacy and to go into the clinical trial space and the rural health and the rural cancer center community in a community center setting. And that's kind of where I've really put a lot of focus on here lately, because that can reach untold amount of people.
Yeah, and it's one thing I've learned from not only you but other people, and my journey is like, because I always been in a major suburban area, is just how different some of it is when you're in a more rural and remote place,
Yeah.
that you don't have the same. I mean, I'm fortunate, I have one of the NCI comprehensive cancer centers here right in my backyard, and I know that doesn't happen for a lot of people, especially if you're in remote areas or rural areas, because they are usually built around population centers. So but I really recommend or commend you for doing that, because I think it's so well needed and not a perspective that I think most of these places get yet. So it's so important. But one of the things that really strikes me in your shared experience, and I know you've already mentioned, the mental health aspect of what you were going through before you really got into advocacy. But, why is this so important? Because, if we look at just social media in general, we see, most people always want to show off their best sides. What is it that, compelled you to want to share both the good and the bad of what you're going through in your advocacy journey?
Yeah, I've always wanted to do the whole story. I remember when I first got sick again, like when the cancer came back and they like put the whole like kitchen sink of chemo into me. I was laying on the bathroom floor and I was watching ESPN like normal, and that was the ESPYs, so it was Jimmy V week, and I was seeing all like the amazing like segments that they were doing, but all the people on there, they had makeup on, had fresh clothes on, and I'm over here laying, and I'm like, I haven't changed clothes in 3 days. I got a little bit of dry throw up on me because I've been sick. I was like, I don't ever see that. And I was like, at that point, I was like, if I ever do talk about what I've went through, what I'm going through, it's got to be the whole thing, or I just wouldn't feel genuine to myself. And then the mental health, like nobody told me about mental health before or when I was diagnosed. And I think a lot of it is the area I grew up in, that Southern Appalachian small town area, even more than just the rest of society. Is like, as a man, you're not supposed to, be impacted by mental health. You're just supposed to shoulder it and get through it. And that about killed me quicker than the cancer did. So I was like, I got to be that voice, because I don't want to see my younger brothers or my nephews or my friends' kids have to deal with that pressure if something happens to them.
Yeah, and I will say, I think that this is not just a small town thing.
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere. I just feel like that, different regions. I think it's different like expectations by everybody else around you too, like the small town, small region areas.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that, it's so important, because I think that most, and especially, and I know we're both part of Man Up to Cancer too, is, which is men's cancer group, that's a lot of what we talk about in there, is like the mental health aspect of, going through a cancer journey and treatment. And even if you're a caregiver, the mental toll that takes on you, and all that. But I can go on a whole nother tangent if we just want to talk about mental health. So, but, as you've gotten involved, with your advocacy journey, and I really like sharing stories of other advocates, because I know there's so many other patients out there that, are looking, going, man, I want to get involved. I want to do this. I want to get, I want to be able to be where JJ is. I want to be where Tim is, or whoever it is that they're looking at. What would you, be able to share as far as, when you were first getting started? And I know this is a difficult question, because I've asked myself the same question, from that first weekend in Missouri, when we were at the Fight CRC ambassador training, what would you suggest if you were to go back into that place again, knowing what you know now, 4 years later, what advice would you be giving yourself?
I would farther explain to myself that advocacy is a whole world put together. There's so many different avenues for it, because when I first got started and I was like, man, I'm going to do advocacy work, all advocacy is fundraising. That was just like the image I had, because anytime you ever hear anybody on like TV talk about there, it usually comes with donate to this cause, which is beyond important. It's just something that I'm not hugely comfortable with. So when I found out that there was more avenues that I could be like, oh, I want to focus on like raising awareness for this, or and then just all the paths that were opened up that I in my mind had closed off or I didn't even know existed. And then I just tell everybody, find what's comfortable to you, what makes you feel the best, and then do it and say yes. Like that's my biggest thing is we left Springfield that time. I got an email asking if I wanted to join a Zoom steering committee. Had no idea what it was. I was just like, yes, I have time. I'm not doing nothing else. And that's led me on get to go to trips with major pharmaceutical companies there. And then through saying yes, it could be a 15-minute Zoom call. They might like what you have to hear, and they might be, with a different organization or a different company. And it just kind of spreads. So I always just tell people, find your avenue that you're comfortable with. It can be policy, fundraising, awareness, screening, like it could be anything, and then just go into it.
Yeah, I remember just wanting to do more and more and more, and I just didn't know where to go or who to contact. And then I think it seems to happen organically once it gets going. And you say that first yes, and it just seems to, it doesn't ever, I think, move as quick as we want sometimes, but it always happens.
I know, like I started doing this thing with the medical data company this year. I'm like, if you'd have told me that, I'd been like, I don't even know what medical data company is. But now I'm like, getting to go to New York City 2 times a year with them. And I'm just like, how did that happen?
Well, and tell people like, I know that, you almost live in a world where advocacy is 100% outside of your treatment of what you do. And I know not everybody is in a position where they can do that, but why, how are you able to keep doing this? And you don't need to give me numbers or anything like that, but just how does being an advocate actually allow you to continue to support yourself and keep going on? Because I know you mentioned all this travel, there's time, there's all this stuff. So, what are different ways that advocates get compensated, I guess, as far as, for their time and their travel and everything else, just so people understand that this isn't something that we just do out of the goodness of our heart, even though I think that's what motivates us to do it, but it's not necessarily why we do it 100%.
Yeah. If I could do it out of the goodness of my heart, I still would. But yes, definitely the compensation. And the biggest misconception is either you do it all on your own or you get paid for everything. Well, I can't get paid for everything because I am on Medicaid, Medicare. So travel reimbursement is a huge thing for me. And it doesn't get counted on income because they're just reimbursing you for travel. So, and I'm like, for me, I will give my time to this cause. But if you pay for a flight and a hotel and my food while I'm there, my Uber rides and my parking at the airport, that's like I'm working and getting paid for it. Because I would never have got to have 90% of the experiences I've got to without that. And then there's so many different like smaller companies that'll do, an hour-long Zoom call and you can get a gift card or they'll work with you. And I always tell people too, when you're like filling out that or you're in a contract with somebody, tell them like what your issue is. And most of the time they work with you. It could be a different form of payment. I've even had somebody where like I couldn't accept payment anymore. So they gave the money to one of the organizations that I represent as a donation. And that allowed that organization to help me with the travel reimbursement.
I love that. I love that.
They're wanting to help because they want the information that you have as a patient and as an advocate. So most of the time they're willing to help in whatever way possible.
Yeah, that it's such an important point to bring up when you're on Medicare or Medicaid, or any form of disability. There's a lot of income restrictions as far as what you can get, and even just reporting income sometimes triggers them to say, "Hey, you don't need this anymore." So I love that you brought that up and shared that. From your perspective as being a patient advocate, what do you think? Why is it so important for some of these organizations that you're working with, from what your perspective and what they've told you? why do they want patient perspectives?
I think a lot of it is to do because they want to get trust back into the larger society, into the population. So they know if they have a patient's trust, if they can show the patient and take their, you know, ideas or their experience and their suggestions and use it throughout the process, they feel like they can get that trust, or they could, just get a better process of everything going on. And I tell people all the time, like, I sit on a lot of review things, and you can tell when they've had a patient review there and they've actually listened to the patient, or they've just took what they said and didn't. Because the longer you're in this world of, being a patient, the more you realize that they have no idea, or they haven't listened to anything. And that's like an automatic, like, turn off, even if you do it subconsciously. Like, I found myself being like, oh, they don't listen to a word we say. And I just kind of like zone out. And I think that's like the biggest thing that I tell patients too, that yes, more and more people are listening to our voice because they realize we listen to their voice. That's going to bring the newer patients. They're going to be able to tell that we do put y'all first.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening to me. Just a few months ago, I was at an event that was all around, the patient-centered, research, and just to come to understand, like, just how new this is.
Oh, no.
And it still is just a very small percentage of the research that's being done with patients being partners in the process instead of just an afterthought. It's like, wow, we got a lot of work to do still in this world.
On some of those steering committees I'm with one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies out there, they just started it after COVID. They had a lung cancer steering committee, and that was it before COVID. And after that, now they have there's 15 cancers represented there. And COVID's a whole different thing, but I think it hurt the population and society's trust in, companies enough to where they're like, no, we got to change something. And I think it's going in the right direction now.
Yeah. And so, you just a minute ago, you mentioned something about like how you're in some of these meetings and you can obviously tell that they're just having you talk, but they're not really applying what you're saying. How does that impact whether you want to continue to work with an organization like that or not?
Well, luckily, most of the time that I've been in there now, they've realized their mistake. So now I'm part of the help to do the solution of it. And they're actually listening. But it does demoralizing almost. They're like, well, why are we here? What are we doing if you're not going to change it, if you're not going to listen to us and involve us in the whole process? And especially for me, because I do a lot of clinical trial advocacy, and we're still, doing just decades worth of how it's always been done. And we're trying to break that down to be like, well, you need to listen to the patients because we're the ones that can help you recruit better and have better retention. And they're finally just starting to listen. So I think it's like anything, especially we do a lot of policy work. There's a lot of nothing happening or very, very minute victories, but those over time hopefully will go to a bigger victory and a bigger or better thing.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about that too, because I know, both of us are in legislative advocacy, and we know a lot of times that usually takes about 10 years to see any change. And from my increased experience in the research advocacy, it's also taking maybe not 10 years, but quite a while. So what keeps you motivated to want to keep going when you don't see immediate results from the work that we do?
I think that's changed over my 10 years into this. Like when I first started, it was all about okay, I know this is going to take a while, but I have friends who are in this and who are dealing with this that have kids. So even if I don't see it right now, it could help them. And that was always motivated me. But now that I've been in this over a decade, I see new patients and what they're getting, the treatment and the support. and everything they have now is so different from me 10 years ago. So I can see the whole process of everything our organizations and companies have been doing over a decade. How many more drugs are available? How much more support is there for cancer care in general? And that's like why I'll never quit now, because I've lived it a whole decade and I've seen the difference.
Yeah. I didn't, man, I just hit my 5 year a little while ago, and I'm like sitting there going, man, I've seen some changes in my 5 years, but I can only imagine another 5 years on top of that, what's changed. Because I know, like, even with my liver transplant, that wasn't something that was around 10 years ago for, certain patients in the colorectal cancer world. And now it's, even in the 2.5 years since I've gotten mine, it's just exploded as far as the number of people getting them. So it's like, definitely a lot of change happens pretty quick nowadays.
Yeah, the screening age was still 50 when I was diagnosed. It's 45 now. I was part of the first immunotherapy for colorectal cancer. Now there's multiple ones there. It's just, and to see where we could be in another 5 or 10 years, that's why I'm always motivated to keep helping and do it.
That's incredible. So, and I know, you write a lot. I'm going to say every day, but I'm not sure if it's every day or not, and it doesn't really matter. You write very consistently. Let's put it that way. As you got started doing that, and I know we talked earlier about, you just don't share the good stuff. You share the downtimes too. I'm sure you didn't get the same kind of engagement and responses as you do today. First of all, if you could just explain what that was like when you first started, and what kept you going at that point in time, where it's easy just to say, oh, only 2 people like this, I'm not going to post it again tomorrow. But you didn't say no, you just kept going. And what was the motivation to keep you going?
Yeah, very different responses from when I first started writing. I actually had some pushback from people that knew me in my town, because they didn't want to hear people talk about the mental health, the suicidal thoughts and all of that. And now it's, much more receptive everywhere. So that's a big change. But when I first started, I was still freshly new into the cancer thing. So I had a bunch of interactions there, because when you first get diagnosed, everybody's there. And then it kind of died away until I got into advocacy. But during that time, I realized, again, what's comfortable with me and why I do this. I'm not one to go and interact with all the comments, because I put things out there. They mean something to me, but if they mean something different to you, I don't want my reactions to change what you think about that post or how it made you feel. And once I became accepted to that, and it didn't matter if it had 20 interactions or 2,000 interactions, in that 20, it could have helped somebody at the darkest moment where something helped me at that time there. And that's, once I accepted that and was like, hey, that's different than what most people post for, in society today, all about clicks and views. I'm like, once that got through, that, kind of brain or the barrier, it made it just so much easier to where I just put out what I feel.
Yep. And it certainly resonates with a lot of people today. So I'm glad you didn't stop doing that. As we kind of try and wrap up here in a few minutes, I just really wanted to kind of ask you, if you were to sit here today and say, maybe in a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, what you'd like to see or be doing in your advocacy efforts, what would that look like?
Well, I would like to see a lot better policy that has got adapted and continuing just to grow the research part of advocacy, but then just a lot more focus on the process of clinical trials, the availability of clinical trials, because every drug we've ever took was a clinical trial at one point. To just have more availability and resources going into them, and to continue being on the front line of helping that advocacy and research is, that. And then always the colorectal cancer and the AYA space, even though by that time I've aged out of it, but, which is crazy to say.
Oh, well, and I know I just want to bring this up for anybody listening that, clinical trials, and JJ, you probably had the same thought as I do on this because I learned this through mine, even though I never went through clinical trials, is not a last ditch effort. It is something, as you brought up, you had those early on in your treatment, journey. And it is something that is so important, I think, for anybody in with any chronic healthcare space to really, as a patient, look at those clinical trials almost and talk to your provider about it like right away. Even if you might not be eligible right away, at least you're like making it part of the conversation, because it's not supposed to be like the media makes us think, like this Hail Mary last ditch effort to keep us alive for a few more months or years.
And a lot of people don't realize too, like a lot of the clinical trials that are out there, especially in NIH, like designated things, aren't a new drug. They're a new dosage or a new combination or this, that. So it isn't always just about this, like you said, a Hail Mary drug. It could be something that is a clinical trial to improve your quality of life if you're on treatment forever like me, or it can be something that you can have less infusions of there. So it's like advocacy. Clinical trial world is a huge world with many different lanes in it.
Oh, yes. Well, JJ, what would be like, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody listening today who's, wanting to get involved in advocacy, what would you tell them?
To do it, to just, even if it makes you uncomfortable, to do it, because I mean, I was not a public speaker before. Now I do public speaking all the time. But even beyond that, you don't realize how much that the community and what you're doing will improve you as a person in your life. I've met my very best friend and so many amazing friends through advocacy. And I'm a better person. And then that helps me continue to do the work that I think is improving the world too. And, I just say yes. And again, do what makes you comfortable, because if you're if you don't feel the purpose of it, you're not going to go all in on it, is I guess the best way.
Love it. And how can people, learn more about what you do, your advocacy efforts, read, what you're sharing with the world? Where online can they find you?
Instagram, any social media site, you can just kind of search JJ Singleton, and that's kind of where I put most of my updates there. And if any article or any video or something ever gets shared or made about me and stuff, that's where I share it at. So that's probably the best bet.
Perfect. Well, JJ, thank you so much. And I know I just saw a post from you the other day talking about all the travels we have coming up in 2026. So I know our paths are probably going to cross a few times in the coming year.
Hard, but it starts early. I go to San Francisco January 7th. So,
well, kicking off the year right away.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on Advocacy at Work, JJ. Really appreciated you being here.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor.